Welcome and thank you for taking the time to learn more about the Grand Forks New Southside Interchange project. This is the second public input meeting that we have had for this project. The project is being undertaken by the North Dakota Department of Transportation in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration as well as the City of Grand Forks. We've also got the consultant team here today, which is composed of Untitled Engineers and Bolton and Mink. My name is Mike Huffington. I am with Untitled Engineers and am serving as the consultant project manager. And with me today, I've got Mike Bittner with Bolton and Mink, who is serving as the lead traffic engineer. So a quick overview on what we are planning to present on today, starting with a quick background on how this project came to be, touch quickly on the existing and future conditions assessment that has been completed for the project, then transition into the interchange needs assessment, then begin looking at the I-29 access alternatives as well as the interchange configuration alternatives, finally touching on the local roadway connections and then next steps. So just to set the context for how this project came about, the East Grand Forks MPO completed an I-29 traffic operations study back in 2017 that looked at the I-29 corridor through Grand Forks and identified current and future needs based on projected land use and traffic growth within the region. One of the significant findings that came from this study was a identification of a breakdown in traffic operations along 32nd Avenue and at the 32nd Avenue interchange. Currently, 32nd Avenue is the southernmost interchange within Grand Forks, but based on current and projected land use growth of the city, you can see that 58% of future employment and 46% of future household growth is projected to occur in South Grand Forks. When that study factored this data into the traffic models, it identified some significant issues at 32nd Avenue, including traffic growth to over 43,000 vehicles per day, as well as queuing along the interchange off-ramps that spilled back onto the interstate. So within that study, a number of potential alternatives were looked at, including major reconstructions and expansion of 32nd Avenue, but ultimately, it was concluded that the only alternative that addressed the issues at 32nd Avenue was the incorporation of a new interchange to the south in order to redistribute those traffic flows. So the Grand Forks New Southside Interchange project is studying the potential for adding a new interchange along I-29 in South Grand Forks. As you can see on the screen, we have identified our study area in red. Generally speaking, we have been looking at the area between 47th Avenue South and 62nd Avenue South for the siting of new interchange alignments, but we have also looked at the existing 32nd Avenue interchange to reassess the potential for improvements at that location. So taking a look at the project schedule, we're currently here in January with our second public input meeting. Our first public input meeting was presented back in June. At that meeting, we did not have any alternatives to present. That was more focused on presentation of the existing and future traffic conditions. Since that meeting, we have developed a number of alternatives, which we'll be presenting here today, hoping to get your feedback on, and then progressing forward from this meeting. The two major components that will need to be wrapped up in this preliminary phase will be completion of the interchange justification request as well as the environmental document approval. I'm now going to pass it over to Mike Bittner to provide a brief overview of the existing and future conditions assessment.
Our story begins at 32nd Avenue, which is also US Business 81. This corridor carries upwards of 30,000 vehicles per day with direct access to some of the region's largest traffic generators, ranging from the Alair Center to the north to several big box retailers in the mall. The corridor generally operates acceptably today with a bit of congestion during the peak hours. This area, however, becomes the epicenter of growth in the future. More than 50% of our population and employment growth for the region occurs within 1 mile of either 32nd Avenue or 42nd Avenue South. A large portion of this land is already being planned by developers and property owners. This produces significant traffic growth without new connections to relieve pressure. We see traffic grow around the 32nd Avenue and I-29 interchange from around 25,000 vehicles per day all the way up to 47,000 vehicles per day. This amount of traffic growth significantly strains the transportation system. We gauge transportation infrastructure effectiveness using level of service, which you can see on the right side of the screen. Level of service ranges from A to F, A being free flow traffic movement and F being deficient. NDDOT requires that we are at a level of service D or better. This corridor operates entirely at level of service F in the future with planned growth. Congestion occurs not only during peak periods but throughout the day. This table illustrates an hour-over-hour analysis of congestion, with nearly every intersection having deficiencies by that future 2050 scenario. This last graphic illustrates the potential for traffic queuing under this growth scenario in 2050. It's important to recognize that it's far more likely that development would stagnate before traffic conditions of this magnitude would occur. Our preliminary estimates show that only about 1/3 of the growth planned for this area could occur before traffic operations become deficient. This provides a major strain to the economic development potential of the community. Next, we'll discuss what types of improvements can resolve our future capacity deficiencies. As part of our process, we looked at a wide variety of different regional infrastructure improvements, ranging from overpasses over I-29 to interchanges, river crossings, and a combination of multiple improvements together. What we found is that the only solution capable of reducing congestion at 32nd Avenue and I-29 interchange, while also providing a positive benefit to cost ratio, was a new interchange at 47th Avenue or just south. This graphic illustrates the potential of a new interchange to reroute traffic away from 32nd Avenue. The blues indicate traffic reduction and the reds indicate traffic increases. In total, we're estimated to save about $56 million over a 25-year period in terms of quantified delay benefits and vehicle mile travel benefits by having this improvement. As we start to think about when an interchange is needed, we evaluated that 32nd Avenue corridor under 2050 growth scenarios without an interchange. What we found is that as soon as 2027, we can start to expect some pretty significant deficiencies at our major bottleneck location of 38th Street. But as we start to average the entire study area, we see that by 2029, we can expect this entire area to have deficient traffic operations. This is based on the assumption that the earliest we could start to see some new traffic generated is around 2025, once we have adjacent and improved roadway connections to this growth area in and around 47th Avenue. While this level and rate of growth may seem quite aggressive, let's take, for example, the most recent new interchange access point within our region, which is located at I-94 and Veterans Boulevard in West Fargo. This was built in 2009. You can see the graphical illustration of directly before the interchange and very recent aerial footage in 2021 and how quickly this area developed. Previous forecasts estimated that this corridor could carry around 26,000 vehicles per day by the year 2035. However, we eclipsed that number very quickly by the year 2015, and traffic is currently upwards of about 32,000 vehicles per day. Next, we'll discuss the I-29 access configurations and the overall alignment of 47th Avenue. We evaluated 3 potential access concepts at I-29. The first is the direct alignment of keeping 47th Avenue on its current alignment and connecting to I-29 at that location. The second is to shift this a quarter mile south to provide us some additional space between 32nd Avenue and 47th Avenue as it relates to merging and diverging on the interstate system. And then the last concept is a collector distributor configuration, which I'll show here in a few slides. This first access configuration is directly at 47th Avenue. One of the features of this concept is we would include an auxiliary lane, which would connect the ramp at 47th Avenue up to 32nd Avenue, which is about a quarter mile access spacing. What this allows us to do is to improve the operations of that small stretch of I-29 and allow it to maintain a level of service B or very acceptable traffic operations, even with some increased traffic volumes from the new interchange. The second concept would be to shift the alignment a quarter mile south to provide some additional space on I-29. Because this is a little bit further away, this concept does not include an auxiliary lane that connects the two interchange ramps. However, that additional space does provide some relief. Overall, this operates just slightly worse on I-29, but still with a very acceptable traffic efficiency rating of level of service C. This last concept is called a collector distributor configuration. What this does is it creates a separate roadway system adjacent to the interstate to facilitate movements between the interchanges. And so the way this would work is that if you wanted to exit at 32nd Avenue, you would exit prior to 47th Avenue. Do note that our graphic is turned on its side with north being to the right in this particular slide. You can see the cross section at the bottom. The benefits this provides is by adding this additional and separated capacity, you are able to achieve a level of service A and the most efficient and safe operations on mainline, with the downside being that it does come with an increased cost.
So as we laid out alternatives, generally speaking, the project corridor does not have a lot of existing constraints and it's largely composed of undeveloped farmland. However, the Grand Forks Campground and RV Park is located right along 47th Avenue on the west side of the interstate and would be impacted by all of the proposed alternatives. We did preliminarily look at shifting the interchange further to the south to avoid impacting the campground. However, other than 47th Avenue, there are no other east-west collector roadways due to the presence of the Kingswell Golf Course. And shifting the interchange further to the south while still tying back into 47th Avenue did create some undesirable roadway geometries. We also looked at shifting the interchange all the way down to 62nd Avenue, but when running that alternative through the traffic model, it did not provide the same operational benefits needed to address the traffic at 32nd Avenue. So, unfortunately, relocation or complete acquisition of this business would likely be required for the project. The other existing constraint within the study area is the presence of an overhead high voltage transmission line that is owned and operated by Minn-Kota Power. As you can see in the figure, this transmission line crosses I-29 at a skew right near 47th Avenue. The tower locations for this line are shown as the circles with an X through them. And as you can see, when laid out relative to the footprints of the on alignment and shifted alignment concepts, the shifted concept would result in relatively minor impacts to this line, likely having to move one tower location, while the on alignment concept would directly impact two pole locations, requiring the line to be rerouted either to the north or south of the interchange. The project team has had some preliminary discussions with Minn-Kota. Based on those conversations, as well as looking at our alternative footprints, the scope of work that would likely be required for relocating this line would include removal of 4 existing tower locations, installation of 3 new dead-end structures, as well as the installation of 3 new tangent structures. So as we look at a comparison of the on alignment concept, shifted concept, collector distributor concept, we see that in terms of crash potential and I-29 traffic operations, the collector distributor concept performs the best, primarily due to the elimination of those merging movements. The on alignment with auxiliary lane also perform well, primarily again because of that auxiliary lane and ability to eliminate some of those traffic merging movements. In terms of construction cost, the collector distributor is a fair bit more expensive than the on alignment and shifted alignment concepts, with the on alignment having the lowest overall cost. Utility impacts we just touched on, and then with regards to right-of-way, the on alignment concept has the lowest overall right-of-way needs, while the shifted alignment concept has the greatest overall right-of-way needs, primarily due to the additional right-of-way needed to tie back into 47th Avenue. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to present the interchange configuration concepts.
We evaluated a wide array of different interchange configuration concepts. And when we talk about interchange configuration concepts, we're talking about how traffic operates at those major ramp intersections. Are they traffic signals? Are they roundabouts? How many intersections? What's the spacing? You name it. What we found is that there were 4 different variations that would operate quite effectively and that will be considered through the environmental document process. The first configuration is a very traditional design. There's a very similar design at I-29 and 32nd Avenue in Fargo. This combines loops that are folded on the south to create separation from the interchanges to the north, in addition to traffic signals. However, in the short term, traffic signals will not be warranted, so this would likely be a stop control on the side street approaches. Overall, with 2050 growth and projections and this configuration with traffic signals, we expect this interchange to operate at a very good level of service B. This second concept is a modified single point urban interchange. And the primary difference between this concept and the previous concept is that the 2 intersections are merged into one centralized location. This provides the benefit of providing additional space between this primary interchange access and adjacent intersections, which can often be a challenge at most interchanges across the state. This does come at the extra cost of having a much larger bridge to accommodate all of these movements in one centralized location.
This last concept is a single lane roundabout configuration. This design operates acceptably at a level of service B, similar to the previous 2 concepts. The primary difference is the location of those loop ramps, as well as the intersection operations with the roundabouts. One of the primary benefits of roundabouts is the elimination of angle crashes, meaning you would expect to see reduced potential for serious crashes relative to a standard intersection configuration. So as we start to look at and compare these alternatives, the first thing we wanted to touch on is right-of-way. As you can see in the table on the left, we have laid out anticipated right-of-way needs for each alternative, and we've done this both with the campground as well as without. The reason for the breakdown is that we anticipate the need for either relocation or complete acquisition of the campground, which would mean purchasing more right-of-way than is necessarily needed for the project. As we compare these alternatives, the on-alignment signals and loops, as well as the on-alignment SPUI, do have the least amount of right-of-way needs, whereas the shifted alignment alternatives have the greatest overall right-of-way needs. Next, taking a look at costs for these alternatives. As shown on the table, the on-alignment signals and loops comes in with the lowest overall construction cost, with the collector distributor being the outlier of the group, coming in approximately $15 to $20 million higher than the other alternatives. I will note these costs are only reflective of construction costs and do not include right-of-way or relocation of the transmission line. We have taken a preliminary look at what we might expect for those other costs, and we believe that they will not affect the overall rank order of the alternatives as it pertains to cost. And finally, we wanted to take a look at the environmental impacts, starting with wetlands. As you can see in the table, the collector-distributor alternative has significantly more wetland impacts than the other alternatives, and this is due to the fact that wetlands currently occupy the majority of the existing ditches along I-29, so construction of the collector-distributor alternative would result in significant impacts to those wetlands. There are no identified floodplains that would be impacted by any of the alternatives, and similarly, no impacts to cultural or historic resources are anticipated for any of the alternatives. Right-of-way needs we already touched on, and then prime farmland impacts would be similar to right-of-way, with the on-alignment alternatives having the least amount of impacts and the shifted alignment alternatives having the greatest amount of impacts. I am now going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about proposed alternatives for tying into the local roadway network.
The North Dakota Department of Transportation has very specific access spacing requirements to that first access point, either east or west of the interchange. This is really important because the vast majority of interchange deficiencies across the state occur at that first intersection location. So we're going to look at two concepts. The first looks at the minimum requirement for that first access point, which is about 1/4 mile away from that ramp intersection. And the second is the preferred, which is 1/2 mile. So this first concept is the preferred access spacing. So you can see we're about 1/2 mile to that first access point, which puts us generally in line with 34th Street to the south. We would have some limited access points at 38th Street, which would be a 3/4 access, which means that we could not have traffic on that side street go straight or make a left turn off of it. The second concept is the minimum DOT spacing requirement, so 1/4 mile to that first full access point, which now aligns with a more shifted 38th Street alignment. We also still maintain that 34th Street, similar access to the west as well.
So as we look to compare the access considerations, specifically looking at restricted access at 38th versus controlled access at 38th, the controlled access for the most part comes out on top, with exception to meeting NDDOT preferred spacing requirements. From a traffic operations standpoint, controlled access at 38th performs quite a bit better with no failing movements and an overall level of service of C. It has a better potential for redistributing traffic to I-29. From a safety standpoint, it has fewer total conflicts. Also, in terms of ped bike, having restricted access at 38th would likely push more traffic to 34th Street, which goes through neighborhoods and past Discovery Elementary, which ultimately could negatively affect ped bike movements in the area. And then finally, from a cost standpoint, both alternatives are relatively comparable. So now that we have looked at alternatives, we want to touch on next steps. As we touched on in the beginning of this presentation, we are currently here in January conducting the second public input meeting for the project. This public input meeting will be followed by a 15-day comment period running from January 12th through January 27th. Following the close of that comment period, the project team will be looking to finalize the environmental document, which is anticipated to include identification of a selected alternative, and then also completing the interchange justification request. So before we close, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation today and engage on this project. As I just mentioned, we will be accepting public comments on the project until January 27th. I highly encourage anyone with comments, questions, or concerns to please reach out and provide those comments. Those comments can be provided to me via either hard mail or email. My email address is mike.huffington@alteg.com. And if you do submit comments via email, if you could please include public input meeting in the email subject heading, that would be very much appreciated. So that concludes our presentation, and thank you again for participating.